Yes, hello? It is I, the Meme Man. Hear me say my famous quote that I am totally familiar with. Definitely.
Look, man, I'll be real. I ain't ever play a Souls game. Not that I don't want to per se. I mean, Demon Souls and Dark Souls certainly have a vibe that I find very attractive, but I'm not that big into punishing games, so they may just not be for me. We'll see. What is for me, though, is said vibe. A vibe felt all throughout FromSoft's library, whether it be the storylines in which time a fuck and everyone a dead, animations that are as bad as they are charming, eerie loneliness, cryptic obtuseness and contradicting tones across all of the boards, characters who feel like they plotters who be peepin', and gameplay that's awkward, bizarre, unique and inventive. They're a studio with a big, super interesting history that I will discuss from a variety of various angles throughout this very video. Bigger than their past, perhaps, may very well be this very present though, as the series that Meme Man came from pretty heavily outshines most of what they've done before it. So much so that when they did buck the trend corner that they've worked themselves into for even so much as a single tiny little title on the side in between tons of releases that already pleased the Soulsborne boys, they were met with dislikes and a general attitude that could be read as,
"Bro, what the fuck? This isn't Bloodborne on PC, bro."
So, I'd say it's about high time y'all get educated. And not just because I'm going to stuff your brain with a bunch of useless garbage that you'll never ever use, but also because the story of FromSoftware as being one of the most innovative and coolest studios ever is one many folks clearly aren't too familiar with. Sure, people be like, oh yeah, they made like Dark Souls but in first person and shitty and mech games, right? Yeah, they certainly made a lot of fucking mech games, but man, goddamn, is it there everything fucking else that is super duper interesting to me and absolutely worth shining a light on. What you're both hearing and seeing right now is Evergrace, which may very well be the weirdest fucking game I have ever played, and trust me, I've seen some fucking shit. But none of it quite feels this, I don't know, amateuristic, punky, postmodern, borderline experimental, one of those buzzwords fits probably. What it is, anyway, is an action RPG kinda like early 3D Zelda, within which you real-time fight, do Wii shops with Wii stats, and do the odd dungy. Unlike 3D Zelda though, which controlled quite intuitively for its time, this game handles a fuck. I mean, for one, the camera is borked beyond repair and you can only snap it behind you with a shoulder, which was true in Zelda as well, to be fair. It's just that there, it'd usually be somewhere behind you in the first place and not just floating about doing literally whatever the fuck it wants. And for two, the combat just don't feel so good, as hits is floaty and slow. Though, granted, this was for sure a bit of a FromSoftware staple at the time. Their games used to be very obtuse, you see. And I don't even mean that in a bad way. There's a fun exploratory nature to it. You're just walking around your Windows 98 screensaver and suddenly you see this little mummy boy having a little jog. So you follow him around like, what's he doing? Where's he gonna go? This little old man. And then of course when you go to say hi, he fucking text your ass. And naturally, also, it takes like 3 seconds into Shadow Tower and chill and you're already poisoned. Though, a bit later, you do find a corpse hole in the ceiling, so, you know, it's okay. Can't say that I'm able to get very far into any of these, though. In Kingsfield 1 USA, I kept getting ganked to shit as the game gave me zero direction, and while I did very much enjoy the actual Kingsfield 1 and really dug the atmosphere of Shadow Tower, the former has painfully stiff combat with hard to gauge hit detection and big damages on your end. and the latter has the enemy placement of a 5-year-old playing Age of Empires and trying to stress the population limits after having just discovered the bazooka card cheats. They can be very hard to play, though not exactly to their detriment, as it only increases your sense of place within the world and how you engage in and with it. By the time you're finding keys and gaining mad levels and selling rare jewels and meeting lost miners and one-shotting snakes because your dick just that big, it defo reaches a point where one could describe it as fun. Even if the average player might only manage to play these fuckers for but a few minutes. And while Evergrace isn't nearly as butt-punishingly hard and mean, I can't help but feel that its obtuseness was as much of an intentional effort. Thing is that you wake up without your memory in this tiny house with spooky music that's all like... And voice acting that's all like...
Darius? Who are you?
And then this old man show up, well... And then there's this creepy demon Aryan child, and you can't tell if anyone's good or evil, or even what's going on, and it's autumn out, but the sky is green, and there's these long PS2 pauses between all of the lines, and it's just, what's going on? What game even looks like this? Sounds like this? Is so beyond fucked tonally. I goddamn love it. But yeah, that happens, and then you just kind of go, with naught but the idea of a crest in the back of your head, giving a vague promise of an objective. Otherwise, Evergrace gives you nothing but uncertainty and weirdness right out of the gate. No direction, only aimless exploration and nearly dying on the first enemy encounter. They don't even give you any equipment, forcing one to amass some semblance of it in a panic by having you put a pot on your head as armor, and maybe, hopefully, seeing the bow back at bed, kinda letting you survive off of what the land supplies, so to say. The game's kinda tribally aesthetic with the runes, pelty menu textures, samples of Native American music waving in and out of the OST, and things like the Stanima, whatever the fuck bar included at the core of most of every mechanic, be it walking or combat, as well as the general chaotic yet beautifully earthy nature to it all, what most definitely suggests a type of wild person, wild world survival type of vibe. In which, the more you find out about the lay of the land and those who inhabit it, the larger your uncertainty and questionable familiarity regarding it grows. Sure, it might look all pretty and bright and colorful, but something's unmistakably amiss here, to say the very least. As you feel naught but alone in this hostile world, in which everything is as alien and off-kilter as it possibly could have been. I mean, I'll get to this fucking soundtrack, as it certainly adds to how odd should be, trust me, but even just the design of the land itself, with the weird ancient artifacts that may or may not be puzzles, these spiky, seashelly things just hanging out, the weird structures dotted across the horizon, enemies that make gross, creepy sounds permeating ominously from even miles away, and then there's shit like the shop being something that you teleport to through these giant windy crystals, and the few NPCs that you do find in the world are either suicidal or tepidly murderous.
Do you wish to die? That might not be such a bad idea.
And then you find a sign, all casual, saying Human Research Lab. It's just what the fuck am I even playing, and why does it feel so good? What's interesting too is that while the combat doesn't feel satisfying or good on a hands-on kinesthetic level, contextually it does begin to feel rewarding. Not just because of the actual rewards you do get letting you buy and upgrade gear and so on, but also because enemies can literally pop up whenever, sometimes in ways that seem designed literally just to fuck with you. And just something about them and their noises and the general mystery of the land, the sense that you never know what's going on and where you're going really, makes the enemies feel weirdly threatening. Like, you don't know what the hell this thing is gonna do. Fucking creepy, lanky-ass, mushroom-looking-ass ghost. Like, fuck that thing. I hate it. It teleports and it won't leave me alone. But man, when you do fuck that thing up and brave whatever uncertainties you may have felt, it feels good. It feels good to buy that armor afterwards. And it feels good that you got this thing. It's a mysterious Jogo, no doubt, but one about being a mysterious Jogo with doubt. Its mysteriousness and obtuseness feed into each other in quite the clever way. That's reflected too in the winding Metroidvania-esque world designs where split ends and blockades that first feel too overwhelming to keep count and track of suddenly turn into these little shortcuts and loop-arounds back to prior explored territory and not so safe but familiar havens. To the point where the mental map that forms slowly inside of your head becomes kind of a reward in and of itself. Plus, again, just how strange yet pretty all of it is made me want to find out more about it. There's lots of neat little vignettes and set pieces and things that feel like they mean something. You don't know what yet, but it's hard not to appreciate how designed, purposeful, and artistically sound all of it at least appears to be. You know, on the map. Dungeons can for sure be a bit of a different affair, with indeed much of the mystery kept intact, but also a much more mazy, harder, and mean-spirited attitude. As here is where Evergrace begins to troll the player, putting traps right outside of doors, random spikes in the floors, and arrows that shoot from walls with little to no warning. Or having a room called Rest Room where you think that you'd be able to save and maybe get some heals going, which, yeah, but it's also full of monkey motherfucker enemies who can be quite the pain to deal with. It also drops bosses on you in areas that do not look like boss rooms in any capacity, and maybe even hiding the cheeky save room from you off to the side so that you may miss it. Basically, it twists and turns the Zelda dungeon conventions upside its head just to fuck around with you. And while this can result in at least one or two unfair feeling deaths, it's not like you don't have the tools to deal with things unprompted or to head in more prepared next time. So it never comes across as unfair exactly, just unpredictable. And luckily, it's never as difficult or trial and error-y as Shadow Tower or Kingsfield due to the frequent save stations and tons of free heal opportunities. Of course, you will still get unavoidably poisoned, but that's just how it be sometimes. Honestly though, this feels like they either learned a lot from games like Kingsfield and got more elegant with the design, or perhaps based on the fantastical anime art style, the fact that you can see some traps and that enemies telegraph their attacks and guard break moments with wee text bubbles, they were hoping this to be a more accessible version of Kingsfield that kids could vibe with, potentially. However, while that is cool, some of the puzzles as a result suck major ass. Not because they're hard, but because they're tedious. Thing is that rather than get an amulet from a strong monster, they went with this clearly color-coded bullshit garbage corresponding with certain pieces of equipment. The problem with this is that it not only requires you to know exactly which pieces of armor or weapons do which elements, but you also need to own them all. Which you can afford just fine, most likely, but given that the game pulls this out of nowhere and that typically in JRPGs you'd have no reason to own all pieces of armor for your one character when you've already bought the strongest one, means that I had to do quite a hefty fuck ton of backtracking back and forth to the store crystal trying to figure out what do, not knowing how many of these shits were in store for me, buying pieces of armor one by one like an asshole. Similarly, there's a bit later where you need to purely color code your equipment. Mandatory fashion soul shit, basically. It's pretty cute. But also comes completely out of nowhere in a section with a lot of really slow fucking platforming that one will have to backtrack through multiple times to see which exact pieces of armor this statue wants you to wear. It's hard, I feel, to get across on paper just how much this sucked, as it does all sound pretty simple, but I think just saying that this whole thing took me a fat 2 hours of this within the same copy-pasty Kingsfield dungeon designs, with the same great, but at this point far too overlooped song, hopefully conveys it at least a little bit. Essentially though, what I'm saying is, buy all equipment! That should save you some headaches, trust me. Either way, these segments only make up about 30% of the whole game, so while not detrimental, it does explain the low review scores it got at the time. Me though, I really fucking enjoyed my time with it. Jank in many areas though it may be, it's pretty goddamn well designed, clever and weird and interesting and creative and other buzzwords that are all pretty dang emblematic of the developer FromSoftware. Now you maybe wonder, the fuck about that music though? Well, that's the work of Kota Hoshino, one of FromSoft's most prolific in-house composers. He likes milk. NBA Live is his favorite video game of all time somehow, and much like myself, he's a making music by ear supremacist, which is common now, but back then in Japan as a professional composer, apparently quite rare. Fuck yo sheet music and music theories though. I push button and make cool sound. Anyway, as a result, his music has a strong amateurish quality to it, which I mean in the best possible way. Like the piano programming on this track. It sounds like Babby's first piano roll and even like a bit of a blueprint for what he'd do years later here. Almost as if that's what he was trying to do, but couldn't quite yet, and this just said, fuck it, drum loops and sample packs, baby! Or the opening FMV theme for Shadow Tower that sounds like he doesn't quite know how to sequence loops to a grid yet to make a cohesive sounding structure. Or this one track called Trans from Armored Core Masters of Arena that it basically sounds like what I was doing in FL Studio when I was like 14. Now, of course, many of his works have the stylings that were quite common in video game music of the 90s and 2000s, i.e. those guitar riff sample packs that show up in anything from Conquer to Tekken 3 to House of the Dead feature heavily in his work. And there's also a lot of typical house drum programming from Korg kits and shit that you hear all over music from the 90s. But the way the samples are cut in ways that rhythmically challenge their intent, or how the hand-programmed drum loops just kind of pound away caveman style, is rather atypical. And instead of him shedding those pensions as he grew more experienced, he instead leaned into them like you done know. Relying more and more on experimental sample pack usage, combining reversed and pitched vocal samples, oddly cut guitar riffs, and what I could only describe as frantic programming, taking the form of speedy jazzy melodies, non-traditional chord changes, and fiercely visceral percussion, resulting in, for example, his poppy yet strange work done for Lost Kingdoms. What if math rock, but also JRPG music? And of course, none other than Evergrace itself. As bizarre as this music might sound, it has elements of European medieval, Middle Eastern, and Native American music. Fierce Wild War rhythms with the stomping of the drums and boots, and the crazy lutes not at all unlike Bard's music. Those motherfuckers though would oft pull some poetry or storytelling or singing or whatever the fuck, and while we don't have that here, there's certainly a lot of progression to this song. Like how the marketplace first feels frantic, cluttered, and chaotic, But then, as you've been there for a while, you start to see order to the chaos, a method to the madness, and perchance you even begin to enjoy yourself while you're there, all the while the song stabilizes to the sounds of native chanting and merriment shit. It almost mirrors the experience of playing most of their games, also seeming bad at first, or hard to parse at least, but as you keep going, you will soon find said method and the titular fun that can be had. Even regardless of that though, it's some pretty non-conventional ass music, which is a style that he's kept all the way into the HD era. Armored Core for Answer, for example, may have had that very atmospheric and more professional sounding title track, but it also has this. It's a straight up bizarre sounding ass mix of genres and vocals and poppy guitar riffs that one can really only get from haphazardly dragging, dropping, chopping, and screwing up samples. Of course, he wasn't the only prolific composer over there, as he'd often team up with Yuki Ichiki on, for instance, the Metal Wolf OST, and he would, on his own, also do the excellently bizarre and equally sample-packy music for Otogi. Not to mention the haunting drones for Kuon and the breezy beats of Enchanted Arms. Sadly, neither of these gents are very active at the studio lately, with FromSoftware outsourcing most of their work to more professional and orchestral composers. But I do still feel that their style of production perfectly matches what FromSoftware was. I.e. a bunch of weirdo amateurs who didn't quite know what they were doing technically and then leaning in on that something fierce. Bucking trends and industry standards, always coming out with games far more interesting, innovative, and experimental than the sum of their parts. Partially though, this is due to them starting out as a software company making business applications. Yeah, that name is like that for a reason, and it also explains why many of their games can feel a bit programmery. What I mean with that is similar to how the term is applied when people say programmer art, implying that it's not art made by an artist or designer or animator, but is instead a quick mock-up done by the programmers, sometimes as placeholders, like just putting down a cylinder or some shit as a reminder of where a character is gonna be, or as the actual final art direction as what Minecraft did. I think these shits aren't even modeled, just straight up hard-coded. And you can see that reflected too in the sheer blocky squareness of many early FromSoftware level designs, or the impossibly stiff animations in titles like Kingsfield. Aside from just visuals though, I'd say that this also bleeds into other aspects of their games, as instead of a screen saying something more elegant like now loading or something with Wii animation, Kingsfield just hits you with the, which is just such a weirdly technical, nerdy way of putting it. Similarly, their menus, even as far as into the 7th gen, are pretty fucking naked, showing all of that raw data, those numbers, those options, and those all capses. Letting the player tinker with any manner of facets of RPG shit way more in-depthly and directly than most other Japanese RPGs would even dare to let you. And if that level of tinkerage wasn't enough, they also straight up gave away one of their engines at some point. Clearly having never quite left their software-heavy pensions behind. In general though, even if or when it might not be the case, it still feels like most of their team members, be it composers, writers, animators, or artists, more or less rolled into what they're doing from whatever their functions were back in the application days. Which their respective IMDb's more or less show as well, and I quite like that, cause fuck professional and formal backgrounds. Anyway, this was a segue, by the way, as none other game exemplifies exactly this, aside from Kingsfield, than the very first Echo Knight. Echo Knight was FromSoft's first attempt at a first-person horror adventure game. First person because Kingsfield Engine, horror because genuinely scary ghost in a I'm 11 years old and home alone at night for the first time and I need to run upstairs to turn the lights on before
They
will come and get me, oh my god! Gameplay loop, an adventure game because dialogue heavy, slow pace and puzzles. It has some serious vibings of FMV games of the time. Your D's, mists, only it's actually running all in engine, making for some of the cutest, chunkiest, dollhouse dioramist modeling this side of, most PS1 games, really. It's good. It's great. And by God is it awkward. Both in a very on-purpose sense, being that the regular assumed flow of time has no bearings on anything going on here as you flash back and forth into flashbacks and recollections and premonitions, going from medieval castles to abandoned houses to spooky cruise ships to funky trains with naught but the warpy weird screen transitions separating them from one another. But also in that, it's a first-person PS1 game in which you look up or down with the triggers and strafe with the shoulders and move like a tank with the D-pad in the slowest getting stuck on literally everything type manner. You see, your name is Richard Osmond, age 25, and you're trying to uncover the death of his father. But rather than do this through regular detective work with clues relating to the situation, instead he just kinda teleports through time, and also there are ghosts. Bad ghosts who will try to get you in the dark, so you best turn on them light switches as quickly as your stubby little Kingsfield feet can. But also good ghosts who will have tragic unsolved stories, keeping them corporeal, requiring Richie to enter their lingering memories. So essentially anything at any time goes. In terms of the setting, tone, the entire sense of realism or groundedness, it's all super fickle but in a adventurous, mysterious sort of way. That's fun to think about and peel away at, even if the game controls like ass and the puzzles range from dead easy and obvious to super cryptic and obtuse. I mean, the story legit has a really neat presentation for its time. Lots of cute cutscenes and epic drama and fun melodramatic MIDI music and sinister as fuck voice acting and cool locations with tons of variations, and yeah, this is definitely where that whole programmer thing comes in as... Well, let's just say that the animation isn't exactly great, but for what it's worth, it adds to the overall theatrical schlockiness, and as I alluded to, the gameplay can legit be quite scary. If you've ever felt that gotta turn the lights on fast terror as a kid, or if you've ever had one of those dreams where you try to run away from something but you feel like you're stuck or sinking, then you already know how this game will fuck you up. As those slow controls make you move like molasses, especially when turning, and most light switches will either be right around beside the door or at the other side of the room, and so every time when you enter a new room shrouded in darkness, as you hear potentially ghosty sound effects, you feel a tension thick enough to cut slices off of. No joke, this dopey ass piece of shit legit had me on edge quite a few times, not to mention the general uncanniness brought on by its...
You don't have to be scared. I just possess an alien power.
Everything, and its first-person presentation make it rife for potential jump scare buildups just as well. Also, it's one of those games that lets you open up all of the cupboards and drawers Shenmue styles, which is genuinely pretty cool. So much so, in fact, that they made an entire sequel which is more or less the same fucking game again. Well, not literally. The setting is different, for instance. It has a far better realized cinematic presence and a more gothic aesthetic, but it also stars Richard Osmond, age 25. It has the exact same light switch ghost gameplay with the exact same ghost trouble-solving gameplay loop. It uses similar themes, and the plot at its core is quite samey, and while the model quality is far better, the animations are equally robotic. Essentially, making the game a different take on the same set of concepts, themes, structures, and ideas. It's good. good, pretty good even. Better than the first in some ways, perhaps, but I can't also help but feel a bit less excited about it due to it being so similar. And as I was playing through all manner of FromSoftware games for this video, this very quickly became a pattern. Like, this is Armored Core Masters of Arena, and this is Armored Core Project Fantasma. Same menu, same OST, same sound effects, same models, same control scheme, same mostly fucking everything. More of it, for sure, in the one following the other, but there's still a lot of pretty blatant copy-pasting going on. Which, is fine given the budgets and team sizes that FromSoftware was working with, and because making assets is pretty hard in general, but it gets weird when you do see them deviate a bit from said copy pasta. For example, they can make a game like, say, Kingsfield, have it be about a certain specific thing with a certain specific playstyle, make a bunch of other games with those exact same things, and call them sequels. So far so good, right? Well, then they make a game that maybe has like a gimmick, or maybe even so much as a mildly different setting, but otherwise, specifically on a surface level, still wholly the fucking same. And then it's a new series. Yeah, that wasn't just Kingsfield gameplay that you saw there. No, that was Shadow Tower. Very different, as you can see. Same with this. This isn't fucking Armored Core. What are you, goddamn stupid? This is Chrome Hounds, duh. Why is it Chrome Hounds? Well, it has a mechanic, you see. It almost seems as if a sequel at FromSoft can only be the most literal interpretation of more of the same, and that this approach ain't just a budgetary thing. And in a way, I do kind of respect that, in the sense that rather than bank on already recognizable IPs, they'd rather start new ones. It's just that if Snake Eater could be MGS3 and Black Flag could be Ascreed 4, then Bloodbutt also could have been Dark Souls 3. But no, the setting is different, has more gun than sword, and so now, new series. And thus, hence, therefore, why Echo Knight 2 is more or less a reimagining of Echo Knight 1, and why Echo Knight 3 is... Wait, what the fuck? It still stars Richard Osmond, it's still dealing with sad, depressed, scary ghosts, and it also does the encased pale pretty lady thing, but we have no way to confirm whether or not if he's age 25. You in space now, and instead of lights turning on shit, you have a panic meter mechanic. Similar to the darkness, I guess we do have a fog thing, the introduction of which to a ghost will make it go feral, thus requiring one to suck it up in a vent, but obviously not every room is going to come with a vent button as it do a light switch, so getting those turned on is a far more roundabout affair with like puzzles and anxiety management and shit. Though essentially it do still function around the same core principles and general gameplay structure. Even controls pretty much the same, which seemed weird at first considering that this ain't a PS1 game nor is it an early PS2 release, but as I moved around the space station in my giant, stiff, bulky, hulking spacesuit, trapped listening to my own breathing and heartbeat struggling to make even the widest corners, things began to make a whole lot of sense. Isn't to say that you don't move a fair bit quicker, likely as to make the more tense running and escapages that you'll be doing a fair bit more doable, but it is still slow enough to make you fear one's own darkness-enshrouded periphery vision. This motherfucker has atmosphere for days. It's a fuck of a whole lot more detailed than your average FromSoft joint for a start. There's actual lighting and reflections that blend greatly with the shadows to create all manner of artifacty visual schisms, with areas stuffed to brim with assets hidden under a thick, grimy, downright dirty-looking fog and vignetting. Lights and monitors flickering off into the distance, illuminating the ends of the long dark hallways as you can hear the buzzing and humming of all the soon-to-be-dead electronics, punctuated solely by the cold, harsh, clunking, echoing drones that are your very footsteps. Shit pairs up pretty well with the limited, dimly lit claustrophobic view from your spacesuit, and the tight, narrow design of the space station in general. Thing is that the game uses rather creative lighting solutions that, rather than using actual lighting, seem to almost straight up call shit out of view. You can see this happening on the horizontal axis a lot when you pull Mat 360s, which allows the game to have a really unnatural contrast between what's lit and what isn't. Using it to highlight points of interest to direct the player in a certain direction, but also to obscure things or to set you up for a good scare. At times, you can barely even see the very fucking floor that you're standing on. It's rather surreal, and when mixed with the slow, spacey controls, it almost begins to feel as if the darkness has a weight to it. Like you're waving through the water, or as if the air is suffocatingly dense. Add to that the heartbeat ramping up as Richard dreads to fall into a state of panic from something that you can't even see nor place very well from an actual aural point of hearing as your movement gets heavier, your vision distorts and contorts, and the already hard to see geometry of blended shadows, lights, artifacting, and reflections, and the sounds of the humming and buzzing machines turning into stinging drones and fucking mist horns or whatever, and you end up with an Echo Knight that's far more concerned with being horror than either of the previous iterations ever were. Do have one bit of beef with the game though, sadly, which is that some puzzle items are rather bullshittily placed. There's quite a fair few examples of things just blending into the background, like this keycard on the bed, or this bit of wall being a cabinet actually. But more egregious is things like this chocolate coin that you need to progress being hidden under these seats. As stated, it's pretty hard to see as B, and you also have quite a lot of freedom to backtrack despite you never really needing to. So including very precise polygon hunting on in there was kind of a dick move in my opinion. Nothing a quick glance at a walkthrough can't fix, obviously, but Jesus man, I could have spent hours looking for this fucking coin if I hadn't. Especially because the ghost who wants it mentions dropping the coin on his way out of the spaceship, which, you know, is the place where you start, so my instinct would have been to walk all the way back. Again, it's not very good puzzle design, and the game sadly pulls shit like this more often than it should. Echo Knight 1 never really did this, but 2 did, having some pretty obtuse puzzles like the music sheet one, and I'm not sure why they decided to complicate 1's puzzle formula so much, but at least, luckily, the game isn't as backtracky as 2 was, maintaining 1's more self-contained areas. I think knowing that mindset helps. Once you know that an item will never be far off, you might be more inclined to look close by, like underneath the chairs, I guess, maybe. I think that's how the puzzles ended up this way, at least. The designers had that mindset, because they knew, because they were making it, but never really communicated that to the player very well due to things like hints sounding off, as I just gave an example for. And then, when you also got items that are maybe a bit too well hidden and a large open map, it becomes easy to end up backtracking a bunch when you never really even had to. It's a bit sucky, but it is what it is, I guess. Regardless of that though, this is easily one of my favorite FromSoftware series so far. The plots and characters are weird, creepy, and interesting, and while shit's a bit weird to actually play, the games tend to be very well paced and comfy, thus prodding my curiosity and sense of discovery, uncovery, drawer pokery, and exploration something fierce. I'm tempted to recommend these to anyone who likes a good adventure game from time to time. Do you want to play a game very tangentially inspired by Darksouls? Do you like photography and Penguin? And also, I did the music for it. It's called Umurangi Generation. My friend Tali made it. It's super cool. You should check it out. I like it. Now, you may have noticed that the footage here looks noticeably sharper than it did for Evergrace and Echo Knight Beyond, and that's because I'm playing this here kuon on PCSX2. As physical copies go for about... And fuck that shit. Sadly, it emulates about as well as a thing that doesn't emulate very well. I'm sure it's playable as it has been so far, but the visual glitches definitely deter me from going through this proper, so for now it'll just have to outscope the scope of this video scope. Same with a game like Otogi. I'd love to play it as it seems super weird and cool and has great music, but I don't have an original Xbox yet, and it's one of those games that isn't backwards compatible with the 360, so I'll have to get to that later too. Also, Tenchu? People are gonna ask about Tenchu, but it's not a FromSoftware game! I see so many people say that. Motherfuckers who do their research even, but it's not a FromSoft series, it's an Acquire series. The studio who do Way of the Samurai and Akiba Strip, those people. FromSoftware did publish some Tenchu games in Japan alone, and they made a Tenchu puzzle spin-off for Xbox Live Arcade, but it's not really in any way their series, so stop saying that, Jesus. Then there's also the seminal masterpiece Ninja Blade, which I will cover at a later date as well, because it really deserves a video all its own. And if I ever get a PSVR headset somehow, I'll check out Deracine 2. For now though, the one game I want to close on is Enchanted Arms, because Enchanted Arms has Pizza Face Man, known in Japan as Enchant Arm, which is both cool and hilarious. The game is an attempt by FromSoftware to make an actual proper big JRPG with all of the towns and maps and characters and systems and the vibes that could best be summed up as Final Fantasy X and Lost Odyssey hook up for a date, but oh god, oh no, oh fuck, neither of them bought any money and now Titus is crying again. Its gameplay though, while definitely similar to either in Maptown and Dunge, ain't similar to neither during battle, where it becomes a full-skill tactics game. And on a story front, it's also sort of kind of doing its own thing, as it's about these three hot boys from their hot boy school in their hot boy city going on a hot boy hot school hot city adventure, when suddenly they oopsie whoopsie their way into an evil dungeon, fucko boingo their way about some secret anime powers, and ooh some ancient demon goddess into the world, thus accidentally wiping their hot boy school and their hot boy city off of the face of the hot boy earth. Oops! Which then, of course, results in worldly travels all across the world, trying to find out how, why, and what to do about it. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that one. And guys, let me tell you, I was enchanted pretty much right away. Like, look at this man. Listen to this acting. No! Listen to this epic comedy.
Huh? What? Where? What's going on?
That's not my editing, by the way. That's the game. It's not fully voiced, and most cutscenes look like cheap PSP horny VN tier shit, but by God, on God, and my God, all caps, no cap, low key, and high key, this game is a treat whenever it is fucking voiced. Ubisoft localized this, and so you'd think that they'd not go full PS1 on this bitch, but somehow they did, which either meant that no one cared, and it got lit. Sell money. Or they did care, knew what type of game this is, even in Japanese, and lean in on that shit harder than H-Tech often even dare to. And it does fit, as everyone in the game is either stupid, kind of an asshole, or both, but cheeky. Granted, whenever the game tries to be a bit more emotional, it has a good 80% chance to fall flat on its ass wholly, few gripping moments aside, but I don't really think that was the main focus here, and it was also directed by the Metal Wolf Chaos guy, which may or may not say more than enough. Plus, if comedy JRPG wasn't enough to tepidly set it apart, it's also the most FromSoftware game ever. Right, in the tutorial, it admits to you that dying doesn't mean shit, and that you're free to try again whenever. Same way that you can cancel out of all phases of a turn, which isn't very usual for most more committal tactical RPGs. The music is also super light and breezy, the worlds and towns are uppity and happy and full of life with no one being dead. Time exists, actually, and while the acting is very bad, it isn't uncanny or off-kilter. You can also save whenever, the story isn't super high concept and mostly just serves as an excuse for a fun adventure. The controls are smooth, the frame rate is decent, the menu's non-brain crushing, it actually fucking tutorializes stuff and dares to explain things to the player. It's just generally, this is the nicest a FromSoftware game has ever felt, played, or been up to this point in their catalog.
What a thrill.
But yeah, combat. Shit's super complex, system heavy, but somehow also really easy to get into and fun. You got the grids with the enemy side and the you side, and because tiles, certain attacks can only hit certain things in certain positions, and even damages is relative to how conga lined up a boy be. It doesn't really deal in crazy shit like tiles with traps or status effects or treasures or wild concepts like being able to directly approach enemies as taking sides into the equation. But what it does do is keep things turn-based turnstile, letting you plan out your plan out very smoothly, easily, and tactically as to then watch shit unfold in a flurry of cool animations and particle effects. At the core of this combat sits the really basic idea of elements, in which opposing elements do bigger damage to one another like fire versus ice. And I do mean one another. Water does big damage to fire, but fire also does so to water. This is dumb, but it stands at the core belief of this game, which is keeping things simple but not shallow. As you see, all characters will have a base element, Legend of the Dragoon style, but weapons, equipment, and the individual equipable attacks and abilities will do so too, regardless of what the person using them is. Add to that, the enemies also being like this, and the fact that you can capture some of them and use them as fully fledged super varied party members Pokemon style, and you might begin to see how one could defo end up in some very tricky-dicky elemental situations or get to big-dicking bum-crushing all by how well you've managed to set up your setup at or disadvantage. Honestly, though, even aside from that, I'd say that what makes the battles as surprisingly fun to me as they are is the idea that your own party members and the enemies will be in completely different randomized positions from one another each battle, thus always needing to strategize attacks to quite the engaging degree. Figuring out who best to put how and where as opposed to who in order to not just even hit them in the first place, but also to be able to set up these super hype combo chain attacks letting you turn battles that would have otherwise taken minutes into mere puny seconds. I really do not want to understate just how satisfying it is and how it makes the otherwise laborious task of random encounters, the vast majority of which generally just boiling down to hitting the attack button as rapidly as possible to just get shit over with, into these wee little mini puzzles. Especially because HP and MP regenerate after every battle, so you aren't really bound by anything in regards to going all out strategizing either. I liked the grinding in this game, and I fucking hate grinding pretty much in general. Which is good as well, as it is quite battle heavy and boss fights do get pretty fucking tricky later on too. Like, the game might not ever get punishing, but it does have a few of those difficulty brick walls to test whether or not you've been paying attention and know what you're doing or not. Have you been dispersing your points good? Have you not been wasting your meager bits of money on cowardly tier healing items over new moves? Do you know how to element properly? That sort of thing. Again, it's a intuitively designed game that hides quite a lot of systems underneath its hood.
Here we go. Yeah.
Oh my god, is that Demon Soul? Normally though, I don't particularly play JRPGs for their battle systems, as I'm mostly in it for the worlds, characters, and the spirit of adventure, and generally Enchanted Arms had me more than covered on that front too. They set up quite the unique and aesthetically varied universe with tons of cool lore and concepts that are admittedly very standard JRPG shits, but made more funner due to just how fucking strange the game is as a whole. There's tons of NPCs, all with funny shit to say and wee little moments, oodles of different towns, cool looking dungeons, very nice musics, and it also has tons of skill to it. A lot of large, big, animated places and vast open plains. And yeah, sure, while some of these places can get a bit copy-pasty looking in that classic Kingsfield rectangle hallway dungeon mazy way, they don't really hurt the game per se, as the varieties in which they come is quite great. Honestly, some of them just look really fucking cool. You'll defo see some unique sights here, nor is every dungeon a copy-paste cave either. There's lush, sunsetty forests, big, epic castles, steaming hot deserts, beautifully vibrant canyons, dingy, vagrant story-esque mines, and serene, calm, swampy lakes. One of the main complaints regarding this game is that its locations look barren, and man, I really do not know about that one. Polygon counts are low for sure, and it is clearly a low-budget game all round, but the towns are all super lively, and the dungeons, again, are often quite bizarre looking, so I think we can excuse this one sewer area that's rather short anyway, and this very cheap Mian High Road looking ripoff. But for real though, this game really got the bad end of the review stick, and aside from the voice acting, I really could not see why. I think maybe Enchanted Child was hit by what we in the industry, i.e. me, would like to call the negativity spiral. Where, cause you dislike the one thing, like the characters or maybe the voice acting, the dislike for that trickles down into other areas you may have otherwise vibed with. And so suddenly all areas are barren, and the combat is slow and tedious, and the characters are obnoxious and generic. To be fair, if you don't think a character saying
"Certainly nothing compared to my extra special Makoto Love Lunch"
is really fucking funny, then maybe the fact that the game is rather easy and super slow going and kinda cheap is gonna put you off, cause there is a lot of talking and it is all presented in cheapo vision. Guess in the end it's not really any different from just a text box appearing over an NPC as it was in older JRPGs, technically speaking, but a weird middle ground in between that and cutscenes is more or less a best of neither worlds sort of thing, as it's none of the swiftness of one or the flashiness of the other. Though I don't really mind either way, and personally I really enjoyed the humor-filled personality-rich banter, which it defo puts first over a lot of things too. Much like, say, a Final Fantasy 7 or 9, you can enter all of the random shops and houses, not necessarily to get an item, but just to see some of the characters fart around, learning things about them or just having them solidify their personalities a bit more, like Toya, the smart nerd handsome man boy impressing the waitresses by being able to do their jobs better than them because he's just so perfect, heart emoji. Shopkeepers so you can talk to actually learn about their wares, where shit come from and how it works. NPCs that update all over the world with each new event, always giving you a piece of their mind, like these two guards being like, "No, you can't pass because of current issue," later being like, "Aha, lol, current issue is gone now, me go vacation." Or having to help doing odd jobs here and there that give you little nuggies about how a city functions, or seeing all manner of ancient artifacts and rubbly ruins strewn across the globe as remnants of the lore-centric war, and naturally you also get to eat the big piz, go gambling at the casino, ride minecarts, and solve a big crime-thieving mystery, and do a handful of other neat wee bullshitteries that just color in the picture nicely. It is a game in love with its own setting and characters, which, if you can love them too, is great. And when you don't, well, let's just say that a lot of these bad review scores calling everyone annoying and the gameplay bland begin to make sense. Well, and this was, in fact, one of the, if not the first JRPG on HD consoles, and so people were probably looking at it like, "Oh my god, it's a next-gen JRPG!" Only then it was Enchanted Arms. One thing I do certainly love is how the characters and plot embrace, subvert, combine, and defy JRPG tropes. For instance, this game's pretty princess lady isn't all soft-spoken or white magey or has this arc in which she learns to stand up. Nah, she got like big dick, big bitch, fuck off and shut up energy and plays more like a monk than a healer. And the nerdy dude, as stated, is also the pretty popular confident boy who everyone likes and he ain't weak neither. And then there's the gay dude who's just a class all on his own entirely, both personality-wise and in combat, as he uses a goddamn trumpet. And he is also actually gay, like openly flirty, none of that flamboyant, purely for comedy type shit you see in a lot of Japanese media. Even pecks a mean smooch at one point in the game and isn't bullied to shit by his friends and has quite a lot going on, which I do not wish to spoil. Not saying that the game is always very progressive about it, mind you, but given its contemporaries it does quite well. And finally, there's our leading lad, Atsuma, who is just the dumbest motherfucker ever, making even Tidus look like goddamn Einstein. This could have been really annoying, and like the big T, may very well be to some, but I personally think it works out pretty well, as it's never treated like a problem or something that he must overcome, nor is he shamed for it in a way that feels like the game's creators could stand behind. He's just kind of an airhead with an addressed but not specified learning disability, and I think that that's pretty cool. Now, of course, big guy over here is stoic guard Man, and Loud Thief Girl is basically just Cowboy Yuffie, but even then, the wee arcs it makes him go through and the relations that they either have or make to others make them seem like a fair bit more than their initial tropages may first imply. It's a pretty neat cast either way, in my opinion, which, again, I may very well be alone in thinking that, going by the game's overall reception, and I do think the vocal performances and the game's insistence on being funny are the cause of that. Granted, it doesn't hurt the story per se, mainly because its standalone plot beats aren't all that great on their own to begin with, as it mostly gains a lot of its plot strengths from the fact that it uses literally every Tales of game storyline convention, even from Tales games that didn't even exist yet when this came out, and combines them with twisty sprinkles and garnishes of Final Fantasy 7, 10, and The Legend of Dragoon. It's just so fucking much. But some of the scenes that make Upset story do fall flat because of the voice acting. Similar to something like Final Fantasy X, I don't think it's the actress's fault at all. If it was, then even the bits that sound fine would have been bad. All of this has the hallmarks of bad actor directing, as a lot of the awkward sounding lines aren't poorly performed on their own as much as that they just don't sound appropriate. A big giveaway here too is that a couple of times the wrong actor will read a line for a character that isn't theirs, or that a line is cut off slightly by the foot wasn't read in time with what was happening on screen, leading me to believe that they were reading off this giant spreadsheet-like script with very little reference as to what the actual scenes were like, with probably just one or two people in the studio, potentially one of whom did not have English as their first language or even at all, knowing what need to do. Localization shit is often done rather cheap and quickly, especially for AA games and most certainly for AA games with tons of text. The people doing the scripts in some cases don't even know what exactly they're working on and are left to operate off of text only or are kept in the dark as much as possible as to avoid leaks, and those acting those scripts out can be days and distances apart from one another in isolated vocal booths, having to knock out a whole game's worth of banter in just a matter of hours. So, while the intentional camp and humor are left intact, anything aside from that ain't always great, and in some cases even a bit full-on tone ruining. It's a shame, I guess, but not at all a detriment to me in any capacity. Quite frankly, the game made me laugh out loud many a times, which actually helped to make me like these characters even more. In either case, Enchanted Arms was pretty great, as I got a lot out of it. I mean, I do these videos largely in part because games inspire me in many ways. Discovering Kota Hoshino's work while playing and doing research for this one, for example, has inadvertently made the music for my upcoming game better. Seeing how rudimentarily modeled, textured, and animated the likes of Echo Knight and Kingsfield are made me realize instantly how they built all of it, thus making me want to build something similar. And seeing a small team make a game on the scale of Enchanted Arms got me to feel as if I could one day make a JRPG too. Now, right, these are all very me-specific things that won't fly with or impact others in perhaps anywhere near the same way, but I also don't really give a shit anymore. I think that the titles I've shown and talked about in this video are all super interesting, cool, and again, inspiring. And given that FromSoftware went as far as giving away their engines and leaving bits of transparency into their designs laid bare throughout all of the ramshackle jank, I take it that they felt the same way. It's like when your customization is so nakedly number heavy as it is in Armored Core for Answer, then you're pretty much inviting people to learn about the back end of RPG systems, and if you leave all of your dialogue as vague, esoteric, yet brutally clear-cut, expository, and lore-heavy when it needs to be, you are going to birth some writers. And there is something to be said about how post-Darksouls 2 FromSoft lost some of that inspirational weirdness as they went big-budget AAA. I'm not shitting on Dark Souls 3 or Sekiro, mind you. Not at all, I'm sure they're great and will have things to take away from in their own right just as well, not to mention that I'm super happy that the studio is doing so well now by doing more or less the type of shit that they've been doing rather than full-on selling out. But what I am saying is that their output over the last few years does seem quite noticeably less varied, as a means to once again express that these older titles are totes worth going back to see the many things that this studio can pull outside of Sword Fight Man. You know, even if you do still die within the first second of most of their games. Also, almost all retrospectives and history on type videos and articles that I've consumed over the past few weeks in lieu of this video were framed from the perspective of Souls fans. writing their shit as if all games in the catalog slowly built up to the masterpiece that is Dark Souls, only discussing whatever wee similarities they can find, like, oh my god, yes, the co-op multiplayer elements in Adventures of Cookie and Cream totally predate how Dark Souls players must work together to... Like, yeah, no, maybe don't. These are all games worth gaming in their own rights, not just steps on a ladder, and any similarities that they do have, as titles like Shadow Tower or Enchanted Arms apparently will, aren't because these are failed Souls attempts, but because those traits are just hallmarks, quirks, and vibes that those working at the studio all share. Whether if that's penchants for cryptic, sinister writing, obtuse, dense, and largely unexplained gameplay systems, big, epic castles and claustrophobic caves, or a rather cheeky sense of humor, all make up the style of the developer FromSoftware.